We Christians, we need to now teach each other, we need to teach ourselves all over again to learn to come back to the earth. They have sent us to heaven so many times, and we have gone so far into heaven and into spiritual world, into spiritual things, that most Christians are not relevant to the earth. And the statistics show it. The statistics show you that Christians are not the ones who are producing the most products in the world. Christians are not the ones who are producing the most most modern technological equipments in the world. They are not being produced by Christians. Christians are not on top of their games in most parts of the world. Christians are not the best professors. They are not the best inventors. They are not the best producer of substance and goods and services. Christians have been left behind. But in the real sense, if you look at history, just a few hundred years back, about 500 years ago, 600, 700 years ago, only Christians were ruling the world. Our civilization actually is a Christian civilization. And that was thanks to the Reformation and to European age of, Renaissance. The period of Renaissance changed the world. And Renaissance is a celebration of knowledge. The celebration of knowledge. Before the Renaissance, what happened was that the church was always control the key of knowledge. The church worldwide was saying that everything is spiritual, that we're only here temporarily, and that we are not here, we don't need to produce anything. You don't even need to learn. You don't even need to read. You don't even need to go to school. I mean, it was the dark ages. It's very similar to what some people are doing today when they tell you that you are going to heaven anyway. So everybody was preparing for heaven, and because they were preparing for heaven so much, they were not sending people to school. Women couldn't go to school, and even people who go to school, you couldn't do research. And mainly, you could only go to school to be a priest. You could only go to school to be a priest. You could only go to school to study something spiritual. You could only go to school to study something spiritual. And what did that lead to? That led to backwardness. It led to such a backwardness that Europeans, these people who are becoming spiritual, they locked themselves in so much spirituality that actually the language of the school the language of the church became the language of school. The language of the church those days was Latin, and it was only in Latin you could learn. So knowledge was totally taken away from people. And so if you are not going to learn catechism, or if you are not going to learn something about theology, if you are not going to learn to become a priest, knowledge does not begin to belong to you. You don't get to learn almost at all. So only churches and priests were getting people schooled. And the only profession they had was theology and catechism and all that. So, and what that led to was that, because there was no progress, there was no understanding, there was no increase in knowledge, there was no light. So that absence of light threw the whole of civilization, the whole of the earth, into darkness. And that is why that age, that period, about 400 or 600 years or something, was known as the Dark Ages. That period was known as the Dark Ages. Dark Ages in the sense that was when some horrible things were taking place. That is when those people who were schooling to be priests and to be bishops, that's when all the atrocities were happening in the churches. That is the only thing you could do, you could go to become a priest, or you could go to the monastery or to the convent and go and lock yourself up there, and just horrible things began to happen over there. That's where the nuns were getting pregnant and getting children everywhere. And if you dare by any accident try to preach the gospel or to read the Bible by yourself, they go and put you in prison. And if you try to preach or talk about the baptism of the Holy Spirit or supernatural, they burn you on the stake. They go and set you on fire. If you try to argue with the church, they just do some horrible things. And that is when we had the period, an historic period they call Inquisition. It was the time of Inquisition. The Inquisition is you dare not question anybody. You dare not question the doctrine of the church. So any time that any authority or any religious authority try to silence people, it always leads to backwardness and dark ages. So because of the theory that time that you couldn't question the authority of the church, it led to Inquisition. And because nobody could question anything, the church could do anything they wanted. I mean, that was the time we had the Crusades. The Crusades is when the believers, the so-called Christians, were trying to take back the Holy Land. And the only way they could find to take back the Holy Land was to go and start a war. So they were starting wars all over the Middle East. And that's why the Christians, I mean, the Muslims hate the Christians up to today. They think that these are what Christianity is about. This is like 500 years or so ago. And they can still not forgive or forget, even though they also did their own atrocities through their own wars. But what I'm trying to say is that any attempt to keep everything in the church and to keep knowledge from people will always lead to atrocities and will always lead to the dark ages.